Greetings, back to politics and policy. This is part two, and I'll start by discussing interest groups. And Stoltz, in the article, The Roles of Interest Groups in U.S. Criminal Justice Policymaking, Who, When, and How, in the journal Criminal Justice, 2002, is a wealth of information about interest groups and the roles of interest groups. And this is a key. This is really important. Here, Professor Stoltz asks, how do interest groups influence the policy process? And then looking at defining the groups by their goals, their resources, and their level and type of participation in policy making. I remember when I was working in Child Protective Services, and I'd go out into the community and meet people, and sometimes people were more influential to help our program function and run. And we had to talk about different goals and also the resources we had or we needed, and also the participation in the policy process. And I began to learn a lot about how that process worked. For some reason, I thought everything ran kind of like a rational system. And when I started working in the field, I was relatively young. I was 21 years old, and I was kind of thrown into it back then. That was in the 80s, before we had the internet, we had rapid transmission of information, and whatever the case might be, I started working in this area, and I realized that there's these policymakers, and I mean, we have to meet with them, we have to talk to them, we have to convince them. Basically, we have to sell them ideas and sell them our needs, to get funding for certain programs and why some programs are more important. And then there's competition in the community for scarce resources, and different agencies have different goals. Sometimes they have the same goals and duplicate services. Sometimes they have different goals, and there's conflicts, and then there's different people in the community who seem to be able to say things to influence and get things done. These interest groups and their leaders are extremely important, like it or not. And sometimes they set the agenda, that they certainly the politicians hear from people and they get influenced in terms of legislation. We see in public hearings, I remember once I at the request of a friend of mine, I went to a local city council meeting to present some data on a situation that he was involved in. And so I presented a research study and sat down, and I had my 3 minutes to present and everything, and I just stated the study, how it was done, what the findings were, and all that. And then some guy stood up and said, I was totally wrong, don't believe that research. But I couldn't stand back up and say, well, what's the rationale? Why am I wrong? Where is their counter research? Then that's all he said. He was an influential member of the community, and people kind of looked at him and said, yeah. So I told my friend, I'm finished with this city politics nonsense. This is crazy. What can I do? And he said, well, all is not lost. Send me a copy of the research, and I will send it on to the city officials. And I'll also summarize for them the findings as well in a letter and attach that, so at least they'll have the article. And I thought, well, okay, that's better than nothing, and I did that. But that always influenced me. Or, years and years later, I don't want to say still bugs me. It certainly, I don't lose sleep over it or anything. But again, it's that frustration, is that what I also learned, I thought, well, I'll speak early and then I can leave and go get some ice cream. But if you leave early, they can talk about your flawed research and all this and that. You can't say anything. You only get 3 minutes. So if you wait longer, then it's less likely. So I don't know. Maybe things have changed, maybe not. And there's also debates and revisions over the policies, and what legislation should be enacted and how that should be implemented, and if things should be changed. There's some policy that was good at the time it was implemented and did what it was supposed to do, but things have changed now, and so now they have to update and revise. And you can see a lot of problems we have in the criminal justice system and related to other systems as well, like our health system, our school system, and so on, and we try to put all that together, we run into all kinds of problems. Just think about school safety and the debates revolving around how to make schools safer. And, probably when I say that, a lot of times people are thinking preventing, mass shooting, mass murder in schools. But I'm also talking about drug use and abuse in schools, bullying in the schools, sexual abuse by school personnel of the students, and so on. And so, it's interesting, just when you mentioned making schools safer, at least right now, the first thing that comes to my mind, based on media depictions and events, is school safety to prevent school shootings, which is obviously very, very important, but also relatively rare compared to bullying and and drug use and other related problems, but something certainly to address. But if you think about a politician, from their perspective, they probably want to go after the what the public would be considered the most important topic. Excuse me. Also, we can look at the policy making process, and some of the questions for case study analysis are presented on page 63 to 64 of the article. For example, agenda setting. What groups initiated the policy? What types of groups? What were their objectives? What were their strategies, resources, and outcomes? So this gives me an idea, thinking about the agenda setting and what groups initiated the policy, is if I'm interested in getting a policy implemented, I might have to select a policy that may not be good as other policies, but one that has the potential and possibility to being listened to and getting through. Also, legislative drafting. What groups attempted to participate, and how did that occur in terms of resources, their strategies, their objectives in getting legislation drafted or policies made, and then public hearings. Excuse me. Policy making process, more questions. What about the deliberations that occur? Looking at that again, and how the actual policy or law is implemented, and how it changes over time, or if it's reauthorized, and so on. And I'm going to break here for a moment, and I'll be coming back with part 3 shortly.